Um, Welcome everybody to Naeem's talk, and very happy to have everybody here at the gallery today. Amidst this wonderful exhibition and also amidst the presence of uh, one of our dearest artists and one of the closest and most core part of experiment, Naeem Mohaiemen. His work has been seen in many iterations across the world, in experimenters more so as in different ways. From the very beginning of the gallery, we've had his work here in many forms, sometimes in terms of video or print-based works or text, and therefore we are very privileged to have you here. Thank you for accepting this invitation. Naeem is based in New York, but his thoughts are based all over the world, especially in South Asia. And through his work, as you would realize, in many ways, coded, uncoded, directly, indirectly, he tries to unravel or relook at, or sometimes maybe relook at what some of the concerns or South Asian ideas of, or even the global ideas of the left are. And also some of them use all kinds of narratives and resources. This is a different project, and I hope you've had an opportunity to go see this solo exhibition. It's a beautiful exhibition. There is a starting and an ending point, or not, depending how you look at the exhibition. And it's culled from personal archives of Naeem's family. And it really is, apart from being a really wonderful exhibition, which it is also gives us a very interesting insight into the way Naeem approaches material. I mean, this is one of the ways amongst many others, and how simply yet in a complex way tries to unravel several things simultaneously. We'll probably talk about some of those aspects today. And without much ado, I invite my dear friend Naeem.
Thank you, Pratik and Priyanka, for not only inviting to do another show, but waiting and kindly reorganizing to have the talk 2 months afterwards. I had some practical reasons why I couldn't be at the opening. So it's really good to be here today. I should admit that I'm quite nervous right now, and I just said to someone right before, Jay, "Ami kintu nervous, can you tell?" And they're like, "Yes, it's very clear." So I should explain why I'm nervous. মানে এক তো হচ্ছে এসে একটু চেয়ারের উপরে কাপড়ের কভার দেখে I did feel like বিয়ে বাড়িতে আছি, and I'm wearing a nice kurta, so therefore I instantly got nervous. Hinting at the absence of something. So the setup is a little bit slightly nerve-wracking because of the orientation. But there's a larger issue, which is that the topic itself, the show, even the title of the show, and the way we changed the title, as Pratik and Priyanka will know, indicate a certain kind of unsettledness inside myself and many others that work on this topic, in particular around the title Dui. The root of the title, when we first came up with the idea, is something I've been obsessed about for a long time, but been unable to articulate properly. Dui is basically the first fragment of the phrase, Dui Banglar checkpost, Uriye dao, Guriye dao, which is supposedly, as I always grew up hearing, was a very popular slogan in 1972, supposedly in both West Bengal and Bangladesh, i.e. when Bangladesh gets created, supposedly, there's all this energy about some sort of vague idea of reunification. And this was a story I grew up hearing. And of course, there's all sorts of ways the story is fantastic. Dui Bangla, checkpost, Uriye dao, Guriye dao. You know, not only destroy the borders, but obviously a left project within that as well. And then when I started researching it, আমার নিজের জন্য, I didn't really find a reality that matched up. Rather, Dui Bangla is quite separate until today. Do I need to move this closer? Rather, Dui Bangla is quite separate, and the amount of separation is actually quite astonishing in all sorts of ways. And my romantic ideas collide with the reality not only of today, but a reality that's granulated actually since 1947, or actually, as some people would argue, such as Joya Chatterjee, it was actually already in place even in 1905. And so one of the political uncomfortable shifts for me and my generation has been that since 71, part of our political articulation has been to say that 47 was a mistake. And somewhere in here is some vague idea that these nations weren't supposed to be separate. And then certain realities that make you think actually the granulation of separation was there as far back as 1905, which is why 1905 could also happen. And yet I'm personally committed to somehow doing the Uriya Dao, Guriya Dao in some small ways. And yet halfway through planning the exhibition, we made the decision, at my request, but also through conversation, to remove the rest of the title and just have Dui. Because I felt it was also too much to project a reality that was so far away from what I was encountering, to lack. Dui, the other reason that this is a little difficult to talk about is that I work on Bangladesh history, South Asian history, especially 47 and 71, sometimes using documents and archives and the big figures, but sometimes with my own family. This project is, of course, about the photographs that my father took. The first iteration of this was a project called Rankin Street 1953, from which the video in the back is, which is the first time I worked on this. This is the second iteration. And throughout is this thread that I find these photographs, but they're not really photographs of important things, quote unquote. They're not on the streets, they don't leave the house. There's a lot of pictures of my aunts who were young children at the time, and the family cats. And sometimes the garden, that's about it. My father apparently hardly ever left the gates of the house. So I'm also in search of some larger history that I don't find in these projects. But then little hints of larger history creep out. And so I wanted to think through what my family was doing over this span and what are the stories that we grew up with. So I know that talks where people look down and read can be a little tedious, but I ask your permission to do so because I won't remember the details otherwise. In some ways, I'll read this to explain a larger context within which this show exists rather than this show itself. But hopefully it'll also become clear through the process what I'm working on. The title of the talk, Our Families Bleed History, is a play on the first volume of Art Spiegelman's Memoir of the Holocaust, Maus 1, where the subtitle is My Father Bleeds History. And I make it both plural and families because of the way I'm thinking through these moments. একটু এই লাইটটা যদি কমানো যায় বা অফ করা যায়। Oops. It's okay? Hopefully it's not too dark. Okay. Our families bleed history. My paternal grandfather, Maulavi Amdad Ali, was encouraged to study mathematics by a British officer because the colonial administration had set a Muslim quota in the civil service after the 1905 partition. Ali took Sanskrit as a second course, and when he went on stage at his Kolkata school to receive a gold medal in that subject, associated with Hindu holy scriptures, a teacher is supposed to have whispered, "It must be a mistake, it's a Muslim boy." Entering the civil service, he had to keep relocating. And so my father was born in East Bengal, Mymensingh, while his younger sister was born in West Bengal, Diamond Harbour. My mother was born in Assam to the Islamic historian Sayyid Murtaza Ali, but soon had to move to Sylhet when the province was divided in 1947. Ali had been writing a short compendium of place names of his province. He now had to truncate it to place name histories of Sylhet. Eventually, both sides of my family flowed toward East Bengal, which had become East Pakistan after 1947. The exception was my maternal grandfather's younger brother, the novelist and flaneur Syed Mujtaba Ali. He wrote an essay demanding that Pakistan keep the language of East Pakistan as Bengali. It is a political project to impose the more Islamic Urdu as the only official language of Pakistan. The new Pakistan government was irritated, and so Ali relocated to West Bengal, which was now in India. In any case, all his intellectual circles were still in West Bengal. And as one of the few Muslim writers in that milieu, he had higher respect. In a humorous short story about Italian immigration he wrote in 1960, he said, "After all these experiences, you think to yourself, well, Indian and Pakistani officers are relatively new to this game of border crossing. They harass the passengers for no reason. In Europe, the customs offices must be there only for the amusement of the tourists." In 1965, India and Pakistan went to war, and my father, as a doctor in the military, had to perform surgery on the war front. He needed a Pakistan military ID, and then finally a Pakistani passport in 1970 when he went to England to study surgery. Returning to Pakistan in 1971, he encountered a nation transformed. The long showdown over the 1970 election results had begun, and people were spitting at Pakistani soldiers on the streets of Dhaka. When war broke out, the end of Pakistan was inevitable. Younger cousins were thrilled and joined the war, while my grandfather retreated into his study and tried to catch the BBC on the radio. He had voted for the Nationalist Party that won a landslide victory. Everyone had voted for them, but he seemed utterly unprepared for the end of the Pakistan of his dreams. The 1971 war ended when India intervened, and a surrender document was signed between General Niazi of Pakistan and General Arora of India. They were both from Punjab province, also bifurcated in 47, and were classmates at Quetta Staff College from British colonial period. This was a strange reunion. My parents had to wait another 2 years to become Bangladeshi because my father had the misfortune to be posted to West Pakistan as a doctor just as the war broke out. Along with thousands of other stranded Bengali officers, he was registered as a POW, or prisoner of war, without having been near the battlefield. My mother and I were collateral prisoners, along with many other families. In 1973, all the prisoners were finally sent back as part of the Simla Peace Accord. Fokker friendship planes sent by the German Red Cross waited for us, and as we drove to the airport, my mother could not stop vomiting over the side of the car. Sometimes I hallucinate that it was the spirit of Pakistan leaving her body. It was some kind of homecoming. In a new country, nothing seemed settled, and disappointment and resentment were in the air. Inside the new Bangladesh army, those who fought in the war received double promotion. People like my father were called repatriates as a slur, and they had to salute their former juniors, the ultimate insult inside the army. Suddenly, there were too many lieutenants, captains, and majors. By 1975, as tensions grew, some army officers started getting posted overseas. 6 months before Sheikh Mujib's assassination, my father was among many sent to work as doctors in Libya. While there, we received news of the murder of Mujib, and later my grandfather's death from natural causes. In exile, there was a small milad, and I could not tell whether it was for my grandfather or Sheikh Mujib. I like to imagine it was for both. Later, as the counter-coups came, some of Mujib's assassins found refuge in Libya. Gaddafi's capacious herd took in, without differentiation, Palestinian guerrillas, Bangladeshi killers, and Japanese Red Army hijackers. The Bangladeshi community in Tripoli was divided. We had left turbulence, but the troubles had followed us. Socialist Republic Libya became an international pariah, and green passbooks were introduced for rations. My mother rolled her eyes as the ration books were given out. We had seen these in 1974 when Bangladesh was racked by the second Bengal famine. But Libya was supposed to be oil rich. Why else did we tolerate miskeen or beggar slurs on the streets of Tripoli? My father declined to renew another 4-year contract, and on our way home, he used some of his savings to buy one of the first VCR players.
It was a Betamax and became obsolete 6 months later. We were as good at predicting technology as history.
Back in Bangladesh, there was an odd calm. Thank you. Back in Bangladesh, there was an odd calm and white paint at the roots of trees. A military man was now president. He wore dark sunglasses, exhorted the nation to dig ditches, and opened a Shishu park. He began fighting with India over Talpotti, a tiny island that would often sink at high tide. There may be oil underneath, or so we heard. Anyway, fighting India united people now. The 1971 special relationship had soured. During the 1975 Maoist-inspired Shipoi Biplab, or Soldiers' Revolution, one of my uncles escaped death because his Batman warned him to flee the mutineers. That same despised Batman system was the first thing on the mutiny's manifesto that had to go, and the only thing the post-1975 military junta abolished. 3 of my family members were senior army officers. 2 young cousins now joined the army, and I was secretly thankful that my poor eyesight had disqualified me from cadet college. One of these cousins, Tutun, died in a road accident while in Namibia as a UN peacekeeper. His photograph is the first in the annual commemoration of UN peacekeeping martyrs, and I wonder how the others died. When I began to probe into 1971 liberation history after college, family members were hesitant. My mother said, as she often does, "Ki dorkar, eshob niye ghatakati korar." Worried that I would not write the Shotik Itihash, an uncle who was a physics teacher wanted to make sure I understood what undivided British India was for him. As he tells it, and never tired of telling me, he woke up one morning in 1947 to find many Hindu teachers had crossed the border, and so he got double promotion to become the new headmaster of the school. From him came a torrent of grievances from a time before Pakistan. These stories were of personal slights received from Bengali Hindus, but over the years I have heard variations from many others. The separate pitol dishes and the breaking of a glass after you drank from it, school humiliations about smelling of onion and the way sisters braided your hair, and of course, my grandfather's Sanskrit gold medal story, which by now I could recite from memory. The trouble is, younger family members could recite an identical set of stories. With Urdu, Biharis, Marwaris, and Paschimas as villains. For at least a few years, Paschima meant dreaded West Pakistan, not a Euro-American West. In 1947, we roughly stayed where we were, except my mother from Assam and my aunt from Diamond Harbor. It is neighbors who left, and the family makes a point to always state that we never tried to profit from distress tale of Hindu lands. That reference is in one of the prints here. 1971, though, was an event of different enormity. There was no staying or waiting. My Marxist cousin, who later studied in Moscow, fled the house to join the rebels, narrowly evading capture by the Pakistan army. But within the same family was a physics professor with resentful memories of Hindu Bengalis before 1947. He stayed in his university job, and after the war, found himself on a collaborator enemies list. In 2010, my father needed a quadruple heart bypass surgery. And since then, he has needed 4 more surgeries over 8 years. Management of the first procedure was botched at the Combined Military Hospital, or CMH. He had worked there his whole life, but it was now run by juniors who barely knew who he was. All his colleagues were retired. Many are already dead. After the CMH mishap, I insisted on taking him abroad for all subsequent surgeries. This is in 2010 at Delhi airport. It was a bitter pill to swallow because his whole life he had criticized any Bangladeshi who went abroad for medical treatment. And now he was one of them as well. For the fourth surgery, we hit a roadblock. For the first time, the Indian embassy in Dhaka denied his medical visa. The visa form was now an electronic submission. So you could no longer leave certain fields empty as you could on the paper form. For the question about whether he or a parent had ever held a Pakistani passport, he answered honestly, yes. That was the grounds for denial. A stringent code that sharpened each time there was a border clash over Kashmir or dead terrorists with Pakistani passports always conveniently in their pockets. I recently found out that a friend was now working at the Indian embassy in Dhaka, and he was high placed, he said. So I told my father we had an inside jack to get that visa now, so we should apply again. He declined to apply, saying to me, "Chhere dao na, eto koshto kore India jawar dorkar nai." Or, "Let it go, no need for so much pain to go to India." Thank you. So that's the text I had written, just to give a backdrop of how family histories intersect and also how families can be scattered by borders and events without ever having moved from their homes. And maybe it gives a little context for this project, I hope. And I'm not sure how to proceed now. I'm not sure how many people have had the chance to see the show, but if they have, maybe they have questions, or maybe they have their own experiences to share or something. And perhaps we should have the lights. Yeah. Thank you for your patience.
Start. So, as Pratik sort of talked about this particular project being one way of you approaching material, of course, the other two films or names, one of them, of course, was shown at the Goethe Institute last year, Triple E Cancer, which was different completely in terms of
And also showed here.
also showed here, sorry, yes. And this is from the recent body of work and 2 meetings in the funeral, which has not been seen but has been written about widely, and maybe one can access that. But specifically looking at the Rankin Street body of work or Bakshira's show, or the show at large, or your uncle's, yes, whatever, your entry point into material. I have, of course, seen you for the last 10 years go back to this material as a point of departure. What compares? Why do you think that this is one of your points of entry?
Even my family.
Yeah.
So I should say something because the images give a different impression of my family dynamic. My father is a...
There are a lot more photographs of my father for various reasons, including my habit of, once he started getting ill, I just started photographing him all the time. I think from a little bit of a fear of holding on to his memories, but he's healthy and with us now. But as a result, there are a lot more photographs of my father, and there's a lot more photographs of my father in the work. And throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, of course, he's the one who has ID photographs. My mother had ID photographs when she got a passport. So my father is the source of many of the ephemera that I've worked with, but my mother is the actual articulation and framework behind why I work. She's the one who actually tells me these stories. Many of the stories about my father, my grandfather, she's the one who tells me those stories with a little bit of skepticism also, because she has her skepticism of the stories. And she also always adds, just like she said, ki dorkar eglo niye ghataghati korar. She also adds, tomake niye bipod, kono golpo bola jay na, eta niye ekta kaj korba, right? So, and it's it's like a breaking of a fourth, fifth, sixth wall, where it's actually become a humorous thing between us. Because I'm also very obsessively on social media, just on Facebook, and sometimes she'll do something and I'll post it, and she'll say, "No, this is my private life. Why are you posting it?" Even if it's a book that she's reading. So there's this family conversation about private moments we are having that have shown up in my work. And I wonder about that too. So I also fluctuate, right? Of course, there isn't actually that much from the family in terms of an archive. If you really dig down into those photographs, there's one ID card of my father from 65, and then one ID card from 75. And the passport he got after Bangladesh became independent. For those who've seen Tripoli cancelled, they'll know that he doesn't have that passport because that's a passport he lost in India, actually at the money changing station at Delhi airport, and then boarded a flight without that passport and landed in Athens and was stranded, which is the source, which is the original idea for Tripoli cancelled, the film about a man. That's a film about a man who lives in an airport, which in the film is an abandoned airport, and in truth is an abandoned airport, but in 77 was Athens airport, and my father was stuck there. So just in terms of an archive, there's actually very little. His passport is missing. They didn't really save anything. He photographed from 1953 all the way up to 1970, but there's no negatives. I mean, there literally is this one box of photographs, which is a reproduction here, and that one box of negatives, which is actually not a lot for a 40-year life. I've recently just started working with an Indian photographer's archive with his daughter, and we're just working on it in terms of like, working is too big, we're just looking at the pictures, but that's a proper photographer, professional press photographer who saved everything, right? So whatever you might think of the photographs, there's 20 years of boxes, right? That's in some senses what I think of as a proper archive. This is actually the archive that doesn't exist, and because it doesn't exist, there's so little of it. I get tremendously excited. I mean, when I found his Libyan ID card one day, I was tremendously excited because there's nothing else. And so I think one of the things that, maybe this is a very roundabout way to answer the question, one of the reasons I come back to my family is because there's actually so little. I might present it, I do present it in a way that makes it appear like it's very, actually there's very little, and because there's so little, I'm actually filling in almost all the gaps, right? Because throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was no sense of the family of witnessing or documenting history. Nobody tried to save anything. They didn't save anything. The things that remain are kind of there by accident because they're the one thing that were in a steel cabinet, which is why it didn't get destroyed. Everything else is gone. It's a routine story in my family life, that many parts of the family library, including Soed Mustafa Ali's library, where sherdore bikri kore dewa hoyese for paper, right? So that's the ultimate in it sold off for paper. So I found it for me actually helpful, or somehow a release or somehow a path when there is very little. When there's a surfeit of material, I don't know what to do with it actually. I don't know how to start, I don't know how to finish. I have material on the 71 war where I've interviewed 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 people, and the more people you interview, the more you have a sense that you actually haven't covered anything. All you need to do is express the material, and immediately somebody will say, well, you didn't interview anyone from this faction, right? Or, I mean, immediately the gaps are clear. So I think my family becomes a way to also understand things on a really small scale. In this project, which literally is, there's 60 frames because there are 60 photographs, and that's really all there is. And the text underneath is literally the conversation I had with my father and his two sisters. And I wasn't necessarily looking for anything, but of course we're talking, and when something connects with something that I know from the political history, I brought it up, so it shows up. So like I mentioned, the fact that our family home is not abandoned property, not distressed sale, is very important for the family to articulate, because they want to say, we didn't take advantage of the Hindu families fleeing, because obviously others did, right? Nor did they take advantage of, after 71, Urdu-speaking families fleeing. So the family's own sense of kind of being people who didn't benefit from these major changes is very important. But out of 60 photographs, there's literally only 2 or 3 times that such political articulations come up. Because I don't know what the word politics means necessarily, but what historical articulation am I going to insert into a photograph of cats? Into a photograph of 3 cats, right? And then 6 cats and 9 cats, although I've been told, and I think it's either in that film or in a conversation I had by Yasmin, art critic who had come to Dhaka when I was working on this project, that cats, of course, are the ones that can look at kings. So there is, you can insert a conversation into anything, right? But there's a lot of just family, and maybe only of interest to my family. And then every now and then there's the small intersection, and I think for me somehow, I'm not sure if I'm making sense or just swirling around the point I'm trying to make. Maybe it isn't so clear actually even to me, but a family to whom a lot of important things did not actually happen. They're very much on the margins of all of these histories. It's kind of accidental. It might sound very dramatic that he was a prisoner of war, but honestly, he was a prisoner of war based on a technicality, and he was a prisoner of war for 2 years because he wasn't, in that sense, important. We were just part of this en masse trading bloc between Bhutto and Mujib that was decided in 73 with Indira Gandhi's help. But we are not the people whose names were mentioned anywhere. And for me, somehow, that becomes a way to think through it. All of these who are swept aside or moved by the events, but aren't really major protagonists in it, but are actually the majority. So I'll stop there because I'm not sure I got somewhere.
আমার যেটা আমি এক্সিবিশনটা দেখিনি তোমার, দেখবো কতদিন পরে, কিন্তু আমার যেটা মনে হচ্ছে তোমার কাজ আমি বেশ কিছু বছর ধরে ফলো করেছি, এবং আজকে তোমার টকটা দেখে যেটা আমার মনে হলো যে the operative word here is ঘাটাঘাটি, as you said, because a lot of your the things that you kind of work with, they're scraps, কখনো স্ট্যাম্প, কখনো ছবি, কখনো কোনো একটা অ্যানেকডোট, এবং তুমি সেগুলোকে ধরে একটা ইতিহাস তৈরি করার চেষ্টা করছো। You just said there's no archive, কিন্তু honestly নাই, আমার মনে হচ্ছে যে there is an archive that you are trying to generate through your work. এবার সেটা কোথায় আছে, কি অবস্থায় আছে, সেটা একমাত্র তুমি জানো। এবার আমার এখানটায় প্রশ্নটা হতো যে আজকে যে টকটা আমি শুনলাম সেখানে 3টে স্তরে আমি জিনিস দেখতে পাচ্ছি। একটা হচ্ছে জাতির প্রশ্ন, জাতির ইতিহাসের প্রশ্ন। 71-এর যখন আমরা কথা বলছি, জাতির ইতিহাসের একটা প্রশ্ন অবভিয়াসলি চলে আসে। তারপরে পরিবার as a unit, because the primary unit is পরিবার, কিন্তু সেখানেও very importantly ব্যক্তি is very important, because পরিবার, the সমষ্টি পরিবার is formed of ব্যক্তি, each individual. তো সেই each individual তারা কি করে এক্সপেরিয়েন্স করছে এই হিস্ট্রিটা, এবং এই ইতিহাসটাই ব্যক্তি কেন্দ্রিক জায়গায় যখন আসছে, তখন নেগোসিয়েশনটা কিভাবে হচ্ছে জাতির ইতিহাস, পরিবারের ইতিহাস এবং ব্যক্তির ইতিহাসের মধ্যে। তুমি কি সেটা নিয়ে একটু কথা বলতে পারো? বিকজ দ্যাট ইজ সামথিং দ্যাট, ফর এক্সাম্পল, টু মেক ইট মোর কংক্রিট, তোমার বাবার যে দ্য ওয়ে হি উড এক্সপিরিয়েন্স 71 এবং পরবর্তী ইতিহাস, বা তোমার মা বা তুমি বা তোমার বোন, it will be the same thing, right? It will be varied and it has to be different. এবং সেখানে জেন্ডারের প্রশ্ন আসছে, সেখানে তাদের র্যাঙ্কের প্রশ্ন আসছে, ইভেন পরিবারের মধ্যে সেই প্রশ্ন আসছে। তো সেইটা নিয়ে তুমি একটু কথা বলতে পারো?
ও যেটা বললো পরিবার,
আচ্ছা,
জাতি, so and I wanted to add the question of citizenship to that, নাগরিক, so তো আমার পরিবার, আমার পরিবারটা কত এসেছে আর আমার মনে হচ্ছে বাড়ি গিয়ে শুধু বাড়ি গিয়ে সই নিতাম। তো আমি ভাবতাম কি কাজ করতো কে জানে, বাড়ি গিয়ে সই নিত। Then I realized it was actually a referendum, যে আসাম বাংলাদেশে থাকবে না ইন্ডিয়াতে থাকবে। Yeah. So, and that was just a story for me. তারপর আস্তে আস্তে যত পড়াশোনা বেড়েছে, যেটা ও বললো ব্যক্তি, পরিবার, নাগরিক, all these intersections, when I completely am piggybacking on what he said and adding the little prism of citizenship within that question as well.
অনেকগুলো প্রশ্ন আমি একটু করে ধরি, সবগুলো তো ধরতে পারবো না। ওই যে ঘাটাঘাটি শব্দটা, হ্যাঁ, এটা আমার আম্মার ফ্রেজ। কি দরকার এগুলো নিয়ে ঘাটাঘাটি করার? 2বার বলেছে সো ফার, মানে 2বার ইন দ্য সেন্স অফ অ্যাকচুয়ালি ওয়ান্টিং টু ইন্টারভিন অ্যান্ড সেটা করার দরকার আছে। এক হচ্ছে দ্যাট প্রজেক্ট ইন দ্য ব্যাক, বিকজ স্পেসিফিক্যালি সৈয়দ মুস্তফা আলী নিয়ে কাজ করো ভালো কথা, কিন্তু উনি হিটলারকে নিয়ে লেখা লিখেছিলেন, এগুলা ঘাটাঘাটি করার কী দরকার, রাইট? এবং এটা একটা কিন্তু গ্র্যাজুয়াল রিয়েলাইজেশন ইন দ্য সেন্স দ্যাট আমরা যখন জাস্ট ফর এনিওয়ান হু হ্যাজন্ট সিন দ্য ব্যাকরুম, ইটস কল ভলিউম 11 এবং it's about the 11th volume of his collected works as part the Kolkata edition, not the Dhaka edition, in which there are 3 essays about Hitler and 1 essay about Palestine. Late discovery for me, ebong dekhar pore I'm not only astonished, also wishing I hadn't found it. Again, it's kind of, that's an archive that exists, but I wish I hadn't found it. And ammar gradual realization that what I'm doing with it, as I started working on it, right, as I started photographing these books up close. Obviously, if you're at home and you're photographing the books up close, at some point, your mother is going to walk into the room and say, ki korcho? তারপর যখন মানে আমার আম্মা, মানে অ্যাকচুয়ালি আমার আম্মা এখন বলে কী করছো, নতুন প্রজেক্ট, হ্যাঁ, এবং ওয়েন শি রিয়েলাইজ কী ফটোগ্রাফ করছি, শি লিটারালি সেড এগুলো নিয়ে ঘাটাঘাটি করার কী দরকার, হ্যাঁ। অ্যান্ড হোয়াট শি মিনস ঘাটাঘাটি ইজ নট জাস্ট অ্যাবাউট discovering the undiscovered or article. She also, you know, ঘাটাঘাটি is also something you do যখন জিনিসপত্র লুকানো থাকে, অগোছালো থাকে, কাদা, এটার সাথে একটা কানেকশন আছে। অ্যাকচুয়ালি হোয়াট শি মিনস ইজ সেডিমেন্টেড ফরগটেন জিনিসগুলোকে আনার কি দরকার। শি অলসো আর্টিকুলেটস ইট অ্যাজ ট্রাবল, হ্যাঁ, এবং এটা কিন্তু একটা জেনারেশনাল, একদম 2 জেনারেশন মিলে এখন একটা বাংলাদেশে হার্ড অ্যান্ড পজিশন হয়ে গেছে যে ইতিহাস টাচ করা ইজ, মানে দিস ইজ অ্যাকচুয়ালি রিলেটিভলি রিসেন্ট ফেনোমেনন। লাস্ট 10 ইয়ার্স একদম সলিড হয়ে গেছে যে ইতিহাস নিয়ে ঘাটাঘাটি করো না, অন্য কোনো কিছু নিয়ে কাজ করো, রাইট? দিস ইজ নট টু বি টাচ, ইট উইল গেট আওয়ার ফ্যামিলি ইন্টু ট্রাবল। অ্যান্ড শি ডাজন্ট জাস্ট মিন our family meaning our stories, she just means history has now been identified as মানে a major tool of state power, হ্যাঁ। সো she means যেগুলো ঘাটাঘাটি করে ধরি দবে, এটা হলো এক। আচ্ছা, 2 হচ্ছে যে মানে ব্যক্তি খালি না, একটা ব্যাপার হচ্ছে যে আমি যেটা বারবার দেখলাম আমার পরিবারের মধ্যে, নট অনলি ব্যক্তি অ্যাজ, মানে কীভাবে বলবো, দে আর নট রিয়েলি প্রোট্যাগনিস্টস, বিকজ অনেক সময় মনে হয় দে ডিডন্ট রিয়েলি মেক দ্য ডিসিশন ওয়াজ মেড ফর দ্যাম। সো আমি মনে করি আমার দাদার এই ম্যাথামেটিক্স পড়ার স্টোরি, হ্যাঁ, you know, the reason I heard it, of course, was you were told from very young age, তোমাকে অঙ্কে ভালো হতে হবে কারণ তোমার দাদা খুব ভালো, যাদবের পাটিগণিত পড়তে হবে, right? যাদবের পাটিগণিত, by the way, is not taught anymore because you can understand why, because of who the author is. All of these things have been removed from the Bangladesh syllabus. But যাদবের পাটিগণিত ভালো করতে হবে. This apocryphal story I heard growing up, যে when one of my aunts got first class, second or third something in physics, he supposedly handed her a jharu and said, এটা ব্যবহার করতে শিখো, তোমার জীবনে আর কিছু নাই, হ্যাঁ। মানে this is an articulation of the patriarch who wants everybody to learn math, হ্যাঁ, who wants math কিন্তু nothing else, হ্যাঁ। And over time, I also understood that one of the reasons he probably learned math, okay, he might have been good at it, but it's also true that civil service quotas were set based on marks. So a British colonial administration actually did tell him, study this, because then you'll get these jobs. Literally, math is the thing that's needed. So amader family theke, if I zoom in as a child and growing up, I've always thought that math is somehow our heritage. Then when I zoom back, I think, but actually math is a, mane, I won't go so far as to say colonial project, because as Zia Haidar Rahman says in his book, which I disagree with in some ways, mathematics supposedly has no color. I don't agree with that fully. But ওই mathematics innocence-টা চলে, তখন আমার কাছে মনে হয় কি যে these are protagonists কিছু larger history মধ্যে, but they're also subject to these forces that they don't see. And I can maybe see some of them only because it's 100 or 75 years later, so things are clearer because actually boy sedimented হয়েছে on top of that, right? So you're actually supposedly looking at family history, but you're also instantly looking at what is the significance of somebody with the last name Ali going to Kolkata schools at this very particular time when they're looking for Muslims in the civil service, and when 47 happens, suddenly there's a lack of Muslims in the civil service in Pakistan, right? So আমার কাছে মনে হয়, going to the citizenship question also, you know, our family, parts of the family, my mother's side, also went door to door to collect signatures for the referendum. And I'm not presuming anything about which side your family was trying to collect signatures for. My family was trying to collect signatures for separation. But in that separation, they all thought that Assam was also going to come to. Why not? The whole thing is going to come because it's based on population. So imagine the family's surprise when they win the referendum and the first thing that happens, they lose their own address, right? That's the part of the family that had to move. So oikhane mono hoy, ekhon dekhle mono hobe, oh, that's so naive, you didn't understand that. But why would they? Like the Radcliffe lines and all that are like a spaceship compared to where they're sitting. So এইটাও আমার কাছে মানে আমার নিজের কাছেও মনে হয় যে অনেক সময় অনেকগুলো ইতিহাসের আমরা একেবারে উই আর ইন ইট, বাট উই আর অলসো বাইস্ট্যান্ডার্স, রাইট? বাংলাদেশের যত মিলিটারি কু হয়েছে, our relationship with it, my relationship to the first military coup I encountered with my first assassination, which is 1980 or 81, Ziaur Rahman, is that 81, thank you, school bondo chilo shedin. That's all. Chuti. So imagine assassination is amar jonno, ওই দিনটা off. And all cousins get together. So of course, that's all I remember of Zia's assassination, that we were sitting around and heavy furti korchilam while Attiyo Shujon very, uncles and aunts khub worried hoye downstairs, right? Talking about what's going to happen. Because also 2 of them are in the army, so they're also wondering, you're in the army, you're wondering if the hatchet is going to come from you, regardless of which discipline you're in. So oitao amar kache khub mone hoy je, সেই classic icon tin drumme, the child is so horrified by what's happening, he just keeps drumming because he wants to drown out the sound, right? We weren't doing that. We were just kind of walking through history without understanding how these things were going to change things. And my mother actually has a much clearer articulation of what was happening than my father. Because I think my father went through these things, very dramatic, 47, 71, and 71. POW hoye jawa was a complete inversion of his world because he's in the army. In the army, you believe loyalty goes from top to bottom. The army never turns on its own. And the army did. Suddenly, he became enemy. His way of dealing with it is to be extremely stoic, right? I've interviewed him about what it felt like to be identified as enemy citizen, and he talks about it as if kichu hoyni. Na, ota kichu na. He talks about it as if it's an administrative shift. My mother talks about what it really was like. And my mother actually, I think, sees things much more clearly, both because she and my aunts are the ones who held the family structure together, and in some ways, because she managed the home and the children, she wasn't obliged to put on a public pretense that everything is normal, right? So there's that. I mean, it's a really big thing that it's almost always my father's photographs in the projects, but it's almost always my mother's voice in there. And I have this one interview of my father done almost 10 years ago while I'm asking him again about this. And the whole thing is my father sitting on camera and answering the questions very minimally. Also answering them in English, which is odd because Bangla, he's often much more articulate, kintu camera on hoyeche, ekhon English the interview dite hobe. And then you keep hearing my mother from the side interjecting and say, you've forgotten that story, or erom bhabe hoyni. She's adding the details. And at some point he says, tale tumi interview koro, right? So there's that whole dynamic between them. And then my mother says, na amar interview korar dorkar nei. So she also feels, no, I'm not the one who's supposed to be in front of the camera. So that movement is also somewhere in the work. And I didn't really, it wasn't really a template that, I'm going to work on Bangladesh history and my family is going to be the template of that, because it's not a very likely template. You'd pick another family that had much more, you'd certainly pick a family that was in Bangladesh 75 to 79, the most tumultuous years of post-71. Those 4 years were in Libya. So we're in a black hole in terms of what was happening. Most significant 4 years, we're out. But it was sort of my family's small history, and their shifts in citizenship is something I can understand. I understand what it means to be able to come to India easily for me, and for my parents not to be able to come, right? And for my mother to have never gone to Assam since they crossed. It becomes easier for me to understand those things. And then also Kolkata is a spur, because Kolkata jokhon ashi, people often introduce me to their parents who have come from East Bengal. And I feel that ওই ইন্ট্রোডাকশনের মধ্যে কিছু একটা আইডিয়া আছে যে আমি কিছু একটা তাদের দিব, বা কিছু একটা সলভ করব, বা কিছু একটা কানেকশন করব, কিন্তু আমি না তাদের গ্রামটা চিনি, না 47-এর আগের কোনো বা 47-এর পরের কোনো বাণী নিয়ে আসতে পারবো, বা কোনো এমন না যে তারা আমার থেকে মাফ চাচ্ছে বা আমি তাদের থেকে মাফ চাচ্ছি, or anything like that. It's more like they're trying to connect and there's no connection. তখন আমি চেষ্টা করি, একটা খুব ভালো ছবি আছে, ডিরেক্টরের নাম ভুলে গেলাম, লং ওয়ে হোম. Thank you. So the 2 sequences, ek hocche je goes to father's village, goes to mother's village, and in one of them the interaction is so traumatic because obviously they also think you've come back to take over your land, that when they leave, I think she says, or he says, na ashli bhalo chilo, right? She says, thank you. And then the second village is suddenly this very welcoming thing, and amar মাথায় আমি চিন্তা করছি তার মানে এখানে জমি জমা ছিল না, that's why they're being so nice to you. But maybe I'm also being too cynical. That's like there's this whole sort of desire to reconnect, but there's no path to reconnect, and the site isn't actually there. And then also this desire to reconnect or resolve or work things out is also very one-sided, because West Bengal has a much larger proportion of people who moved. East Bengal doesn't have the same ratio. আমাদের ফ্যামিলির মধ্যে একটাই, and it's not on a train, it's not accompanied by stories of riots. So there's also, this is a big thing that Bangladeshi historians were talking about. In order for 71 to work, 47 has to disappear. And 47 disappears very easily anyway, because you don't have a population of people who've been holding on to those stories. Except if you go to Rajshahi, you get small fragments. You go to Khulna, you get small fragments. That's another part of the whole thing, which is that Bangladesh has developed a body of history in which partition actually has to disappear for 71 to make sense. And the entire, there can be no East Pakistan project, right? East Pakistan has to be a period of false consciousness, so that 47 is a brief diversion, but we were always going to be Bangladesh, right? Which, by the way, once upon a time also used to be the name sometimes used for United Bengal. And there's a story I heard from someone, ভুলে যাচ্ছি কে এবং ভুলে যাচ্ছি who it's about, I only remember the quote, যে 71 পরে যখন বাংলাদেশ কথাটা ব্যবহৃত হচ্ছে, initially it's two words, Bangladesh, doesn't get concatenated. And somebody from Poshchim Bongo says, তোরা যদি বাংলাদেশ হোস তাহলে আমরা কি, তাই না? There's that whole thing, and that's, in a way, maybe that's why Poshchim has to be there and all of this stuff. Anyway, I don't want to give a grand theory either, because I don't have one.
জানিও না actually। কোন
There's a question.
I don't have a question, Naeem. It's just it's a comment, a little about your work, a little about my life. It's kind of heartening to see a father. It's almost moving, because I've been hearing about your father from you in this form, right? Encompassed within an artistic articulation. It's very moving. So that's a comment. And although your family has been almost subterranean, subtextual since the time I've been seeing your work. So to see it being foregrounded like this is quite encourages on your part. So that's the comment, in the sense that, I think it's looking at, I think, moving away from this meta-historic left work that you're doing to this shift into the self-reflexive, domestic, familial framework. The domestic family world is absolutely moving in a way that I can, in a way that I think it is transforming your work. In a way that I think it will be very, very, very moving. The thing that being a Punjabi, coming from a partition family, born and brought up in Calcutta, and living with that consciousness of being an Awali partition subject, trying to make Bengali film, living and working with collaborators who are all partition Bengalis from West Bengal, things, because from East Bengal, things become so intense. Recently in Chalmikis, we went to Borishal last year, searching for his ancestral house, and we didn't find it, but we found an idea of it, which was very different to Shupriya's film. And we
met somebody who had a list of people who were actually traveling in the 47th.
And it was like such a, and for me, when we went to Borishal, when I and Shalini and Jacqueline went to Borishal, it was like, I can never visit my family house in Pakistan. My father can't, he's now 77, and because of the way the situation is. And he's been here, like, next month he was just telling me, next month will be 50 years of living in West Bengal. I think a lot of what you say about your mother and your father is kind of so resonates within my family, my extended family, about what partition meant to us. And also, very fundamentally, the Punjabi partition and the Bengali partition are very, very different. Monumentally different, because you have one big reason is that Punjab partition happened in less than 3 months, whereas the Bengal partition is a long partition which still continues. So thank you.
I just want to add one thing. Sorry, before I forget. Also, I think the difference is Shupriya's film is made 10. So I think that's also part of it, that in 2000 it's still possible to find some residue. 2018, there's lot less of the residue now in 18 years. So এটাও একটা বড় ব্যাপার কিন্তু, যে কোন সময় যাওয়া হলো, লোকজনের বয়স কত, কে মারা গেছে।
আমার প্রশ্ন না হলে একটা কৌতূহল বলা হয়, পার্টিশনটা তো মেইনলি ধর্মভিত্তিক হয়েছিল, হিন্দু মুসলিম আমরা যদি বলি, তার রেজাল্টিং মাইগ্রেশনটাও ধর্মভিত্তিক হয়েছিল, মানে হিন্দু বাঙালিরা এই পাশে মুসলিম বাঙালিরা ওই পাশে গেছে। তো আমরা তো এখানে, আমিও যেমন আজকের অনুষ্ঠানটা এসেছি আমার মা বাবার থেকে অনেক ওই বাংলাদেশের কথা শুনে, দেশের কথা শুনে আমার মনে অটোমেটিক্যালি এই অনুসন্ধানে লেগেছে। এইখান থেকে মুসলিম যারা ওখানে গেছিলেন তারাও কি এই পাশের ব্যাপারে ওরা কি নস্টালজিক? এখান থেকে তত যায়নি। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, যারা গেছিলেন তারা কি নস্টালজিক যে আমরা যখন ছিলাম এইখানে কলকাতায় এই হতো ওই হতো?
আমার কোন মনে হয় নস্টালজিক না, বিকজ পলিটিক্যাল সিচুয়েশনটা ডাজন্ট অ্যালাউ দ্যাট ইন দ্য কারেন্ট অর ইভেন লাস্ট 10-15-20 বছর, 10-15-20 বছরের পলিটিক্সের মধ্যে, ভারতের সাথে রিলেশনশিপ ক্যানট বি জাস্ট অ্যাবাউট মেমোরি অর ফ্যামিলি, রাইট? ইটস অন্য অনেক কিছুর মধ্যে আর্টিকুলেটেড। সো আইদার ইউর উইদিন দ্য ক্যাটাগরি দ্যাট অ্যাকচুয়ালি ওয়ান্টস টু শো স্ট্রং অ্যালাইনমেন্ট, ইনক্লুডিং ইন কালচার, অ্যান্ড দ্যাট হ্যাজ ইটস স্ট্রং ক্রিটিক্স অ্যাজ ওয়েল, রাইট? ফর দোজ ট্রাইং টু নাও, the whole idea of having a separate Bengali culture that somehow has a Bengali Muslim articulation and somehow tries to now say that there's a 100-year history, which there may or may not be. In some cases there is, in some cases it's now being articulated, including the figures that we're now re-evaluating, because we want certain figures. Oitar moddhe West Bengal kintu is a very problematic thing if you're trying to have a outside of hegemony position. So amar kache mone even পশ্চিমবঙ্গে আমাদের কী ছিল এটা নিয়ে গল্প বলা মানে ইনোসেন্টভাবেও হতে পারে না। মানে ইন সার্টেন ওয়েজ ইফ ইউ এক্সপ্রেস, আই নো পিপল, আফসান চৌধুরী ইজ এ সিগনিফিকেন্ট হিস্টোরিয়ান, হিজ ফ্যামিলি কামস ফ্রম ওয়েস্ট বেঙ্গল, হি ডাজন্ট টক অ্যাবাউট দিস দ্যাট অফেন, হি টকস টু মি ইন প্রাইভেট, বিকজ আই থিঙ্ক, আমি জানি উনি অতটা ভেবে করছেন কিনা, বাট আই থিঙ্ক ইন সার্টেন কনটেক্সটস, নট অল কনটেক্সটস, pointing to that can also make it more complicated for you to stake out a political position inside Bangladesh, because closeness to India is suspect within a large portion of the political cultural conversation, right? It's actually a defining spectrum now of Bangladeshi politics, right? In a way that a more radical position would be to not be subservient to India. And we are in all sorts of ways, politically, culturally, actually subservient to India in all sorts of ways, not just West Bengal, but Delhi-centric. So having to, amar kache mono hoy, West Bengal connection is also sometimes a little bit of liability. I'm not talking about মধ্যবিত্ত উচ্চ মধ্যবিত্ত যেখানে এটা is a sign of cosmopolitanism or actually a sign that তোমার বাপ দাদা 14 গোষ্ঠী is from a more distinguished background ওটা আছে, but I'm talking in larger articulation. So you might talk about it in a certain context, কিন্তু তুমি যদি পত্রিকায় লেখো এটা কিন্তু আরেকটা significance আছে. So generally I haven't seen that much of it, and I think that isn't just how many people are there who moved over, it's that that's not really a narrative that it's not rewarded, ek number. Dui number, it can render your position complicated, and larger culture, that isn't, 47 isn't what people are talking about anyway, because 47 makes 71 complicated, right? So for example, Bangladesh's jonno number one adverse is 52, because 52 is the beginning of, this is always what we're about, Bangla Bhasha, right? And Bhasha above religion, even though of course that reverses itself. So, and Bangladesh anywhere, but Bangladesh itihash is actually a key lever of domination and fighting domination, right? So কোনো দেশেই ইতিহাস অতটা ইনোসেন্ট একেবারেই না, বাট বাংলাদেশ ইট has reached a particular peak, যেটার মধ্যে 71 is the node যেটা চারিদিকে সব কিছু ঘুরে, হ্যাঁ। So I've met people, for example, পাকিস্তান থেকে, West Pakistan, whose families left in 71, right? Urdu speaking, who fled, had terrible experiences. These are not narratives we're supposed to talk about in Bangladesh. So I meet someone like this actually in Lahore 2 years ago, and I said, you should come, and you should find your family that's left, and you should interview them. Same thing I said, before they pass away, with their boy Shonek. And she started making preparations, started contacting people. First thing that she encountered is nervousness on her potential host's part. যে এটা নিয়ে রিসার্চ করবেন, আচ্ছা আমাদের বাসায় থাকা হয়তো আপনি একটু রেস্ট হাউসে থাকেন, রাইট? দিস আর স্মল থিংস, ইউ ক্যান অফ কোর্স ফাইন্ড আ রেস্ট হাউস, বাট when your first encounter meets a nervous recipient who's worried that you're going to come to Bangladesh and find stories about Bengalis killing Biharis, quote unquote, in 71, that nervousness also has something to do with those articulations it's not encouraged at all. So it's এর চাইতে অনেক complicated factor, but that's one thing I've seen definitely. I think no, there's a sense of denial about 71. We didn't kill anyone. I mean, you know, we are apparently, I know this is being recorded, so please don't put it online. We're apparently the first war fought where at the end of the war, when we have the strength and the army's gone, we didn't carry out any reprisals. In which sense, you know, we're kind of unique. I mean, sarcastically, of course it happens, right? Afsan Chaudhry's written about this. He's said that, you know, the Biharis were the ultimate bully because when the Pakistan army leaves, of course they're there. And of course you're going to go after them, right? And of course you're going to round them up. And of course they have property. So there's other factors going on. এগুলো নিয়ে একেবারেই কথা হয় না. And people who have written about it, like Afsan's also written about it, Manosh Chaudhary has a great short story called Ali Biharir Kombol, which is about a blanket, but it's obviously from a murdered Bihari. These things, you know, I've actually, funnily enough, pointed to them when I was responding to Shormila Bosh's book as examples that, look, Bangladesh has all this admission of Urdu, anti-Urdu violence, anti-Bihari violence, but actually in reality, those are read by a very small group of people, right? And they're not at all the mainstream discourse, and actually it's becoming less so. I mean, probably tide will turn, there'll be some big opening, whatever, but we're not in that moment right now. So এগুলো কিন্তু এফেক্ট করে যে কোন ধরনের স্মৃতি নিয়ে you'll be invited to come on television. Ebong, I have interviewed someone, Khulnae, he's passed away. But when I interviewed him in 2016, he knew he was going to pass away in a year and a half or so. Even so, no family, so nobody to protect either. Even so, when he finally told me that I am a 52 soldier, Bhasha Shoinik, but I wonder if we made the right decision to break Pakistan, he asked me to turn the recorder off. And then he checked 3 times to make sure the recorder was off, asked me to show the light. I mean, he passed away a year later, but he had that much fear. Jodi ami shikar kori je I'm having second thoughts about Bangladesh because I think Pakistan otota kharap chilo na after all, je some sort of united Muslim homeland. At that age with no family, he's worried about the punishment, right? And so that has a huge impact on what sort of stories can articulate.
Small point to discuss. One is about the partition, which we almost mean, all of us know about it. The second point is interesting. So I'm into advertising and fashion photography. That's how I know Priyanka, Rajala, everybody out here. Now. So I've been to Bangladesh like several times. Pretty several times. I came across a gentleman, very well known. He took me to Ocean Club in the evening after the shoot, very successful shoot. And we were sitting there. Suddenly he picked up a topic and I had no answer. If you have the answer, then I'll be really happy. But still, as of today, I don't have the answer. He tried to prove a point for which I didn't have to reply. He said that you are Indian and Amra Bolam Bangali. Right. So he has to say that Ami Bangali, Ami Indian. Uni Bangali. I completely agree that this is the language people have fought, what happened in front of Dhaka University, what the other Pakistan military did to them. It's all known to us. Then the war happened, then Bangladesh bombed, everything. It's all known to us. It was the history. But he's still hanging on to that. You are Indian. And I'm a Bengali. So how will I prove that I'm also a Bengali? My name is
Letting go of Mother India's memories.
I will do
That's
that.
true.
No, you have to, I mean, I need an explanation. I came and asked my mom, because mom is from Faridpur and dad is from Bihar. So there's no question asking dad. So I asked mom that, I'm not Bangali. What is
Key
it?
sentence of this book.
Tell me.
Mother India's memories.
You got to let go of Mother India's memories. You know.
Oh, okay. No, but that's okay. But somebody, over the table is telling that you're not a Bangali. how do I prove that I'm a Bangla?
Well, I'll complicate it by saying this interaction happened at Gulshan Club. That's a very posh part of town, and it's a very posh place. Not anyone can go. You need to have a special card. Often people with a second passport, American or British, have an easier time getting admission. So I'm presuming this well-known gentleman is also quite posh and well-to-do. Gulshan Club's not a typical place to bring friends from out of town, etc. And he's presumably in the ad agency or etc. So I think there's also that going on, right? Where there is also perhaps a desire to especially prove his nationalist credentials to you, which requires.
I still remember but that was the first time, till date the last time I had got into was access.
Person. Okay. Yeah.
That he sent me to pick up from my
So I think the other, I mean, this is not an answer at all, but the elite, the 1% of Bangladesh, also have actually probably the maximum interaction with Indians because they're in the business sector, right? I mean, there's a huge Indian population. They're all at the upper echelons of garments and advertising, etc. So I've found, interestingly, the strongest anti-Indian articulation, one from the left, of course, historically, two from the opposition to the current government, where it becomes a way to oppose the current government, three from the elite that actually has the most interaction with Indians, does business with them, and therefore needs to articulate a point of differentiation even more. Some of the largest stories I've heard about how much money Indians are repatriating from Bangladesh, I always hear from those who are in that sector, right? I mean, I have nothing to do with any sector where Indians are coming in on 6-month visas and taking out XYZ. They do. And they're the ones who have the strongest irritation about it. That irritation could also, I don't have a theory, but could also be a way to create a position for themselves where you can do this while also denouncing it. I think it's also interesting that he said Bengali, not Bangladeshi, because Bangladeshi is the more dominant discourse, right? But that's that actually would, right?
I claim a two passport thing. He claims a green passport. That's fine.
As far as you know, he might have a second passport.
He might, I don't know, but he's from Bangladesh.
We always say that the point of differentiation on the flight is when you get down and you see who's standing on which line, because there's and then suddenly you see all the Bangladesh. Second passport is a phenomenon in Bangladesh.
I had no answer at that point.
I don't either, of course.
But
পরের বার বলবেন গুলশান ক্লাবে নেবেন না ভাই, আমি একটু অন্য সাইড অফ টাইনা যাব। I mean, Gulshan Club it's a funny paradoxical place to be having this conversation. It's
point one which I was saying, imagine after an over 200 years of rule of the entire nation, if you all have seen that undivided India's map somewhere or the other. How can, I mean, this is ridiculous. How can you have a humongous country which takes 2.5 hours from one city to other, from one major city to another major city, I'm talking about Kolkata to Bombay, to 2 or 45 minutes to reach in between two countries, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. And that is ridiculous. And I have a strong feeling that this they had in mind from 1905. That's the reason they shifted the capital out from Bengal to Delhi. Because they knew that, Bengal, Calcutta being a capital, is too close to the other territory, right? I mean, we don't have, I don't think most, you have traveled the most, I believe, a lot of people have. One country with two other countries on either side, do we have that in the world?
Somebody else is an expert of geography.
Anybody?
Palestine.
Also, not in this case.
Yeah, United States
Not on
and
that
Alaska.
scale.
You go to Alaska.
You have to
You have to fly by Canada to go to Alaska.
right, you have to fly back. But
I think
that you have to cross India and go to your country again. You don't have to cross India.
I just want to respond to your first. I think your question that this gentleman is asking, who was laughed here, is a very poignant question. Very poignant.
Okay.
What does it mean to be a Bengali then? I mean, that's the point. It's what does it mean to be Bengali? And in today's time, with Modi and Amit Shah at the helm, that is also in question. Is what does it mean to be a Hindu? Because that's eventually going to move towards.
is not that what does it mean to be an Indian, it's eventually going to be what does it mean to be a Hindu, which is happening in Pakistan. For instance, in Pakistan, the question is not if you're a Pakistani or not, it's like what kind of a Muslim you are. Are you a Sunni Muslim? Are you Ahmadiyya? Are you a Shia? Are you a Sufi? So that kind of question is going to be asked here. And therefore the question that was asked to you is a very poignant question, is that what does it mean to be what we are? And in a larger theoretical question, like, are we a Bengali? I mean, like, I'm born and raised in Calcutta, but I'm an Awami. But I make films in Bangla. So who am I? So this is the question we ask.
That is, I know you personally.
No, exactly. So this is I think the question he's asking you is a fun. This is what I think what Naeem is trying to explore is this question. Like, what does it mean to be Bengali? Does it mean to be Bengali if you are from Bangladesh, you have fought a war over language? No, I'm just saying that whole identity, which is what I think Naeem is exploring. What does it mean? So if you're in West Bengal, what are you being foregrounded? An Indian, a Bengali, a Hindu, a Muslim? I think this is a very important question in the times we are in.
By citizenship, I'm an Indian, but by religion, I'm a Hindu.
Well, right now you can't even talk about citizenship with the Let's not talk about it. The citizenship issue is also. That also might not work. They're asking for your grandfather's passport now. In Assam, Aadhaar doesn't work. None of the citizenship documents work. They're asking for your grandfather's birth certificate. My grandfather was born in Bardan, Peshawar. Who am I?
That's the community.
Huh?
You won't be able to reach there.
I don't know. I think yesterday only the US, or day before yesterday, there was a hearing at the US Congress, and one of the senators said, "This is a ludicrous idea. What does NRC mean? What the hell are they going to do with this?"
Yeah, that is a separate.
Exactly. So I think the question that this gentleman asked, irrespective of the elite location, is a
But
very
this question
important
was
question.
asked much before Modi. Modi was still selling chai at that
But also in India,
We got this question just not from the elite class in Bangladesh when we were there. Everyone in Borishal, when we landed, we went to the college. Yes. And there were people like, "Oh, I'm Indian." And I'm Bangla kotha bolchi, shobi korchi. And he was like, "No, I'm Indian, amra Bengali." And I was like, "Yes." And I completely respect that.
no, because in India there is a tendency making you Indian and dissolving your.
Indian what?
It's a hollow, empty thing, but people love it. That's why they say Bharat Mata ki Jai and cheer at cricket matches and so on. So it's an empty something which takes over your identity. So you're no longer Bengali, everything is Indian. But that Indian has no language, no color, no nothing. But we've learned to worship it.
We have got what, 25 official languages? Or 22 was this?
Yeah.
25 is right now, I believe. I might be wrong. Please correct me if I'm-
But there is a tendency for Hindi to marginalize everything else.
Is there a question there?
See, there should be a common language. There should be a common language.
Let it be German.
আচ্ছা আমি আসলে ওনার কথার উত্তরে একটা কথা বলতে চাইছিলাম। এইটা হচ্ছে সবচেয়ে মজার করে পাওয়া যায়, আমি বাংলাতেই বলি, আমি ইংরেজিটা পারি না। সেটা হচ্ছে আহমদ সাফা নামে একজন লেখক আছেন বাংলাদেশের, আর ভদ্রলোকের একটা বই আছে বাঙালি মুসলমানের মন। সেই বাঙালি মুসলমানের মনের মধ্যে একটা গল্প ছিল ঠিক এই ধরনের, কারবালার ঘটনা। কারবালা সম্পর্কে তো জানি, তাই না? সেই যে দুই ডাইনেস্টি নিয়ে মারামারি, তারপর হচ্ছে নবীর হচ্ছে ওম ব্লাড, যারা হচ্ছে ক্ষমতা পাবে কিনা সেই নিয়ে মারামারি। তো কারবালার ঘটনাটা একটা ধরনের হচ্ছে গ্রেট ট্র্যাজিক। তো এপিক তৈরি করার জন্য কায়কোবাদ কবি সে লিখেছিল হচ্ছে কারবালার গল্পটা। তো সেই কারবালার গল্পটা উনি তো ধরেন হচ্ছে কোত্থেকে নিল, এখানকার লোক সমাজে প্রচলিত গল্পগুলো থেকেই উনি সেই কারবালার গল্পটা তৈরি করেন, মহাকাব্যর মতো লেখার চেষ্টা করেন। তো সেই মহাকাব্যের অদ্ভুত একটা জায়গা আছে, খুব চমৎকার গল্প। এখন ইয়াজিদ না, সম্ভবত ইয়াজিদ না হয় হচ্ছে হাসান অথবা হোসেনের কেউ একজন, ইয়াজিদি। এখন দেখা গেল যে হচ্ছে লাশটা গুম করে ও যখন হচ্ছে হাসানকে মারলো, মেরে এক হিন্দু লোকের বাড়িতে গিয়ে আশ্রয় দিল। তখন সেই কল্লাটা নাকি কথা বলছিল, এবং সেই হিন্দু লোকটা মুসলমান হয়ে গেল সেই হাসানের কথা শুনে, এই ইনজাস্টিসের কথা শুনে। তো এই জায়গাটা হচ্ছে খুব খুব মজার যে সেখানে ঠিক প্রান্তিক জনগোষ্ঠীর মধ্যে গল্পটা ঠিক এরকম ভাবে প্রচলিত আছে যে প্রতিশোধটা নিচ্ছে কি করে নিম্নবর্গের লোকজন বা অন্য ধর্মের লোকজন। এটা এরকম হতে পারে যে আমি কলকাতায় আমি যখন সর্বপ্রথম এসেছি তখন আমি শুনেছি না ওরা তো বাঙালি নয়, ওরা মুসলমান। তখন আমি বললাম যে হচ্ছে তাহলে আমি কি, তাই না? এখন এই ধরনের একটা আইডেন্টিটি ক্রাইসিসটা আছে। এইটা যতটা না আমরা আসলে আমাদের ন্যাশনালিস্টিক ভাবে দেখা, রাষ্ট্রের তো অধিকার আমাদের নেই, আমি জানি না আপনাদের কারো কারো থাকতেও পারে, এই রাষ্ট্রটা তো আমি চালাই না, এটা বড় লোকরা চালায়। সো ওরা ধরেন হচ্ছে ওদের কথা বলার জন্য নানা ধরনের নানা আইডেন্টিটি তৈরি হয়। আপনাকে যে বলেছে যে আমি বাঙালি আপনি নন, সেটা হচ্ছে ওই যে তুমি তো বাঙালি না, তুমি তো মুসলমান। এটা হচ্ছে সেইটার প্রতিশোধ, এই প্রতিশোধটা নিচ্ছি। এখন সবচেয়ে বড় সমস্যা হলো আমরা কেউ জন্মের আগে বলে জন্মাইনি যে আমরা এখানে জন্ম দাও, ওখানে জন্ম দাও, ধর্ম দাও, এখন যেটা আমরা আসলে কখনো আর্নই করিনি, এটা আমরা কখনো নিজের করে নিইনি। এতে আমার কোনো কষ্ট হয়নি আমার মুসলমান ঘরে জন্মানো, এতে আমার এই সিদ্ধান্ত আমার ছিল না। যখন এই সিদ্ধান্ত আমার ছিল না, তখন যখন এই ধরনের কথা আসতে থাকে তখন আসলে এর পেছনের বাম করছে শ্রেণী রাজনীতিটা খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ হয় আর কি। কোথায় বসে কথা বলছি ডিপেন্ডস অন দ্যাট।
বলতে চাই যে এই যে পরিচয় খুঁজে বের করা যায়, আইডেন্টিটি আমরা বুঝবো কি করে, আমার পরিচয়টা কি? প্রাথমিক পরিচয় আমাদের উচিত আমরা কি করি, পেশাদারি পরিচয়টা আমার হওয়া উচিত। তারপরে আমাদের যে পরিচয়টা আমরা খুঁজতে চাই সেখানে আমার জাতি কি, আমার ভাষা কি, আমার ভাষা কি, আমার সংস্কৃতি কি, বা আমার সভ্যতা কি, সেগুলোকে আমি রাষ্ট্রনীতি তিনটে ফাল্কন ধরতে পারি। যে কোনো সভ্যতা বা সংস্কৃতিকে যদি ব্যাখ্যা করি, আমরা সভ্যতাকে ব্যাখ্যা করবো কি দিয়ে? তিনটে ফাল্কন হতে পারে, একটা বিজ্ঞান, একটা সংস্কৃতি, একটা মানবতা। সেক্ষেত্রে আমি আপনি যেমন বললেন আপনি একজন ফ্যাশন ফটোগ্রাফার, এবং আমাদের প্রত্যেকেরই কোনো না কোনো পেশাদারি পরিচয় আছে, সেটাকে আমরা সাপোর্ট দেবো কি করে? সেই সভ্যতা, সংস্কৃতি এবং বিজ্ঞান দিয়ে, যেটা কিনা এই ভূপ্রকৃতি বা এই অঞ্চলের মধ্যে দিয়ে আমাদের জ্ঞানে বা আমাদের কাজের মধ্যে রিফ্লেক্টেড হয়। আপনার কাজের মধ্যে দিয়ে যখন আপনি আপনার সংস্কৃতি, যেটা আপনি বলতে চাইছেন যে আমি ইন্ডিয়ান নয় কেন বা আমি বাঙালি নয় কেন, সেই সভ্যতা বা সংস্কৃতিকে যখন আপনি ক্রিটিক্যালি সাইজ করবেন, নট অনলি অ্যাপ্রিসিয়েশন, যখনই দেখবে যে আপনি আপনার সভ্যতা সংস্কৃতিকে ক্রিটিক্যালি সাইজ করছেন, তখন আপনি সেই সভ্যতা বা সংস্কৃতির দাবিটা পেতে পারেন। মানে এক কথা আছে আপনি বাঙালি ফটোগ্রাফার, নাকি আপনি ইন্ডিয়ান ফটোগ্রাফার, নাকি আপনি ইসরায়েলি ফটোগ্রাফার, বেসিক্যালি ফটোগ্রাফার। সেটাই প্রাথমিক পরিচয় হওয়া উচিত। আমাদের যে শ্রেণী চিন্তার জায়গা থেকে যে পরিচয় আমরা দাবি করবো, সেটা আমরা প্রাথমিকভাবে দাবি করবো। এরপরে আমি কোন সভ্যতা সংস্কৃতি রিপ্রেজেন্ট করতে পারি সেটা গৌণ বলে মনে করি। এবং সেটা যে কেউ বাঙালি হতে পারে, যে কেউ ইন্ডিয়ান হতে পারে, যে কেউ ইসরায়েলি হতে পারে।
যার কোনো পেশা নেই,
Time for one last question, and I think gentlemen will comment after your.
Okay, yeah, I would just like to, remind people, the identity, there's nothing natural about it. You're not born into an identity. Identity is not directly connected to culture, language, or anything else. Identity is always relational. So, because my name is Mukherjee, I'm all Bangla. Unless I'm with a Bihari driver, then I'm Bangla. And So identity, this idea which has become very much embedded in the politics that we live all amidst, that identity is something pure and natural and something that we know, is actually what is used by politicians and the political establishment to put people against each other. Identity is always shifting. And I think a microhistory like Naeem is talking about that looks at how these identity, shift according to the relational aspects of place, of position in society, of class, of course of gender as well. All these positionalities affect the construction of identity, obviously. So there's no such thing as a wrong element. I would say.
Last one.
No, I another Bengali filmmaker, Ashish, Rama's Janam, you flipped around, you're in Canada or wherever, but your genetics are probably. No, I just remembered something that a friend told me a while back, well before Modi and Shah and all this. He said, he was a designer, and he was talking to a Bangladeshi friend. And he said, this guy turned around to him and said, you Indians are so lucky. You had Gandhi, you had Nehru, and we never had any of this. And this guy sort of said, I felt really sad because from whatever, till 1947 at least, all of us had, for what they were worth, Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, Bose, all these people. But talking about the hierarchization of 52 over 47 and then 71 over 52, I mean, there's this kind of reduction of memory or reduction of ownership, almost, where as a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi, you don't feel like Nehru or Gandhi or any of the other national. Is Bhagat Singh, did Pakistanis and Bengalis have Bhagat Singh? I think they did, but would anyone recognize it as such? No, so it depends what you divest or what you're taught in identity terms to divest as you're growing up. But this is not yours. This is not yours. I mean, I'm 60 years old, I still have to hear, Aapni to kitu Bangali no. And I feel like giving him a couple of kisses and say, I was born and I've lived in Calcutta for 30 more years than you have. I may not be Bengali, but I'm a Calcutta. What do you want to make of it? So, I mean, no, it's just interesting that these things did brought up. The microhistory was actually very moving, I thought. I'm sorry, just to finish. And it raises all these questions. It sort of prongs in different directions in a way that, really enjoyed the show. Thank you.
On that note, and after a very, very interesting conversation, I think it went to a direction that Naeem possibly hadn't imagined. If you have any closing words or...
I want person travel over no prejudice.
পাঁচ বছর আগে নাইমের একটা শো হয়, and I think the title of that show sort of sums up what we're talking about, Prisoners of Shotik Itihas. On that note, thank you for coming and have a good evening.